Hey everyone, it's the Signal's editor-in-chief, Nichelle Wolfe, and I'm bringing y'all a very special installment of Extrovert in Lockdown because this is a pandemic blog that I document through the written word. When something major came along, I I feel like I needed to share it in a new and exciting way. So here's a once in a lifetime, or like something equally dramatic, audio slash podcast slash blog, a plog episode of Extrovert in Lockdown. When I first started the series, I was quarantining, baking banana bread, wondering what was my life going to be. And I was in the midst of an increasingly long lockdown. But as vaccinations began rolling out and I got my 2 shots of Moderna, I started easing back into society. And my definition of easing back into society meant that in a 6-month time period, I went out to eat 3 times, I saw 2 films, and I went to 1 museum. So I wasn't fully out into the quote unquote real world just yet. It never felt right or safe for me to do so. But when the opportunity to attend Comicpalooza arose, I was desperate for some kind of normality. So I jumped at the chance. I mean, it was going to be my first event since COVID-19 hit. I haven't really done much since I went to New York City in March of 2020. So as a massive pop culture junkie, and I mean, seriously, how could I not be with a Star Trek inspired name? It might seem kind of shocking that I've never been to any kind of fan convention. It's not that I was actively avoiding them, but I never sought one out for myself. I kind of thought, these things only happened in California or in Europe. I didn't realize there was one so close to me. I mean, that's a tiny lie. The past few years I've heard about Comicpalooza. I've had friends attend it. I've been a part of the Signal when we covered it. I've only really started to avoid fan conventions in the past few years. I really wanted to go to one before that, and I definitely planned out 1 or 2 or 5 that included some kind of pop culture / comic convention. But in 2018, that all kind of changed. I went to work in the Magic Kingdom at Disney World, and I discovered that I have an irrational fear of adults in costumes. Just as an FYI, that's really not the place to find out that you're afraid of adults in costumes. Just a heads up. Well, I do respect and love the creativity and the artistic vision and sheer talent that goes into cosplay costumes. I just don't want to be near one. I can't explain why. They're just irrational. But this episode isn't about my irrational fears, otherwise we'd be talking about tomatoes. It's about me facing them and attending something that I've grew up wanting to see. So, part of my way of coping when I know I'm going to be confronted by an irrational fear is to extensively plan. I walked into George R. Brown Convention Center and I had a little piece of paper in my purse with me. And on that piece of paper had my entire itinerary for the day. I even planned my own bathroom breaks. I was ready for Comicpalooza. But Comicpalooza wasn't. Not that it wasn't open or anything. It was. There was a line. It was just kind of a disorganized mess. Panels and seating were shoved into unused vendor space. The vendor section was a tight, chaotic mess. And the amount of people per square foot was higher than that of Magic Kingdom on Christmas Day. It was like my own personal brand of a nightmare, but with far more variants of Loki than a Marvel Cinematic Universe TV show. One of the panels I attended didn't have enough seating, and shoppers visiting stalls just walked back and forth across the stage. When I asked multiple volunteers where the podcast was hosted, none of them actually knew what I was talking about. I ended up leaving early for personal reasons that I'm not going to get into here, but I wasn't really upset that I had to. Comicpalooza was a crowded and confusing mess. I know that COVID-19 and the pandemic really put a damper on everything, and that it was a lot of people's first experience with a large event in over a year. But I was still kind of disappointed. It was like winning a balloon at a carnival and watching it slowly deflate throughout the day. When I talked to my friends who had previously Comicpalooza in the past, they were shocked and confused when I told them what my experience was like. None of their previous experience was like that at all. And one of my friends, who even went this year, swore up and down that this year was the outlier. That Comicpalooza is so much better. I don't hold this year's Comicpalooza against anyone all that much. I can't imagine how difficult it must be to pull off something of this scale during a pandemic. For that, I will praise them. However, it wasn't fun. It was a mess, and some of the volunteers were rude. The attendees acted as if a pandemic wasn't raging on outside the doors. There was way too many vendors, and how the panels were conducted was a slap to the face for the special guests and attendees. I don't know if I'll ever attend another fan convention, in all honesty. It just kind of wasn't for me, and I would have realized that with any version of Comicpalooza. My pop culture obsession is more of the dedicated researcher than the cosplayer or the merch owner. And that's okay. If you want to do those things, do them. Whatever makes you happy. It just doesn't make me happy. If you attended this year's Comicpalooza and you loved it, I am so happy for you. There were some really cool things. I personally kind of fawned over the 1967 Chevy Impala from Supernatural. That was really cool. But I don't think that it would have been for me, even in the best of circumstances. Without a pandemic, without the overwhelming fear of catching the Delta variant of COVID, I I don't think I would have enjoyed it. And it's okay to realize these things. I will say that I am very happy that I have experienced it and that I am so thankful for those who put it on, for doing something that made other people feel happy. And for that, I am thankful.